Jack, you spent much of your career fighting the Russians during the Cold War. In the last several years, we have seen Vladimir Putin flex his muscles and try to reassert Russia's place on the global stage. Does this strike you as familiar?
Most of my adult career was devoted to arm wrestling with Russian intelligence around the world. I mean, I did run the Afghan program back in the late 80s to drive the Russians out of Afghanistan. This is one area where I, prior to the election, was of the view that we really should be working for a reset with Russia. It isn't the communist Russia that I ended up struggling with for so long. But because we have drifted into a less collegial environment, Russia has returned to some of its, coming back to your point, deja vu. Have I been in this space before? And what is Russia doing? It wants Mother Russia to be the center of its area of influence. Having access to the Middle East and warm water ports go back to the 1900s. And what do we see in Syria? What do we see in Crimea, Ukraine? Is Russia pressing? Now it has also added some of the old Cold War techniques of, having flights along the border of Scandinavia. And then we look at the 2016 election here in the United States, which I think requires some reflection.
Jack, after what you just said, how is this now meddling into for example, the 2016 election? How did that play part of it?
Good intelligence has embedded in it restraint. There used to be what we called Moscow rules. All right, there was an understanding. You can't find it. No one can show you the document. And if you ask 5 different KGB officers or 5, they'd come up with slightly diversified. But one thing that I think would be consistent is interfering with internal political processes were considered off the board. Where we and they try to do things internally was not part of the playbook. So when I started to see indications of hacking into the DNC and hacking other things, I accepted that as part of what is universal today. All nations are hacking into everything they can. But the key difference, which is at variance from my experience, is the breaking of the Moscow rules. And this is very dangerous, because if they meddle in our elections, we would reciprocate, right? And then where do you end up in this match? So when I look at the meddling, now I'm sure many people in the United States are going to disagree. Small potatoes. If this is the best that Russia can do in meddling, is spend a few $100,000 and get in the website, it really, to the best of my knowledge, did not affect the needle in the election. Never, this is one of Jack Devine's maxioms, never dabble in action. In other words, don't dabble in it. If you're going to do it, make sure it's important enough to do it full bore. So the meddling now has created a huge problem, and that huge problem has changed the basic discourse between the United States and Russia, and it is not allowing, Trump was of the view that you should reset. The possibilities of resetting today have been marginalized as a result of this dabbling. So, many people, I remember, I don't want to misquote the European magazine, but it had on the cover, this Putin as the great strategist in the chessboard. And I actually gave him more credit than I would. I think he's a formidable leader in Russia for sure. But as a strategist, this, from my perspective, meddling in the American elections really has such a huge downside, including sanctions, but it's not in the club. It's not likely to become part of the European club environment, accepted as a co-player under these conditions. So I do think we need to go back to the world I'm familiar with, which is we need some ground rules on internal operational activities.
I strongly recommend you to follow Jack Devine on Twitter. He always shares very interesting thoughts and insights. Don't forget to subscribe to Race for the Empire. Follow me on Twitter and see you on the next episode.